Today we're going to learn how to find the circumference of a circle. Now, there's a few words that we need to understand fully before we get started. The main parts of the circle is the circle itself. Now, I've labelled this as circumference because circumference means the perimeter of the circle. So it's the length all the way around the outside. We also need these two words, diameter and radius. Now, the diameter is any line that joins 2 points on the circle while going through the centre. And a radius is any point that goes from the centre to another point on the edge of the circle. So you might like to write those notes down in your book so that you remember their formal definitions. It's important to also understand that one diameter equals 2 radii. Now, radii is just the plural for radius. And that kind of makes sense because if you look at any diameter, it's going to be broken up into the parts on one side of the centre and on the other side of the centre, and both of those are radii. You can think of a radius almost like the spokes of the wheel, if you looked at the circle as a great big wheel. Now, how do we make sense of the formula for the circumference? Well, what I'd like you to do now is draw yourself a circle. So you'll need to listen to the instructions, then pause the video and have a go at this yourself. You can draw any size circle. I've drawn 3 here so that I can show you that it works no matter what the size. Once you've drawn your circle, also draw in a diameter going through the centre, and you're going to cut a piece of string that is the exact length of that diameter. Now, once you have your piece of string, you're going to use it as a measuring tape to measure how many times it goes around the outside. So I'm going to take a pen here. I'm going to start from this point here, and it's a little bit rough. This is not going to be exact because your fingers can only hold the string so well. But I'm going to use my string and walk my way around the edge here and see roughly where it comes to. Now, this first length comes to about there, which sort of makes sense, doesn't it? If the diameter is this long, if you started here and curved it around, it only gets this far. So let's go again and do another diameter. This whole measuring piece of string is the length of one diameter. Feeding it around the edge, trying to stay on the line. My second diameter got me to here. Okay, now let's go again. A third diameter is going to start where the other one finished. And I need to walk it around with my fingers, and it's going to end here. All right, so the question that you need to ask yourself then is, how many diameters are there in one circumference? Well, 1, 2, 3 and a bit. And 3 and a bit sounds like a bit of a dodgy sort of number, 3 and a bit, but 3 and a bit is exactly how many diameters there are in a circumference. Now, whether you've made a large circle or a small circle, this holds true. So if I made a piece of string the exact size of this diameter and start here and walk my way around, it is still, there's 1, going to give me 3 and a bit diameters. Let's have a look and check that it's true. That's 2. And the third one is going to make it most of the way, but not all the way. It came a bit short. So again, 1, 2, 3 and a bit. Now, this happens no matter how big your circle is, because the bigger the circle is, the bigger its diameter is, and the circumference is going to stay in the same proportion to the diameter. So we can write down our formula here and say that circumference equals the diameter, right, times 3 and a bit. Now, there's a special number for this 3 and a bit. It's called pi. So let's write this number down. It's spelled like this, pi. It doesn't have an E on it, like the pie that you eat. And pi has a symbol like this. Draw 2 sticks and then draw a curvy line along the top. And pi is equal to 3.14 or so. Now, the decimals keep on going on and on and on. And at this point, it might be handy to have a look at pi on your calculator. Now, on your calculator, pi is down here on the button right in the middle at the bottom, but it's a yellow function. So if you see the yellow functions, you access those by hitting the shift button first, and then you hit this button that says times 10 to the power of x, and its little yellow function just above is pi. Now that'll put the pi symbol on your calculator, and if you hit equals, you'll get the value for pi coming down the bottom there. So you can see that it's 3.14159, etc., etc. Now this is an irrational number, which means that those decimals go on forever, and you can't actually approximate this as a fraction. Lots of people try. They say it's roughly the same. Now this symbol here, if you haven't seen it, means it's not quite equal, but it's close to equal. It's close to being equal to 22 divided by 7, but it's not perfect, okay? Now this is a reasonable approximation, so it's only approximately that. Now if you don't have a calculator and you want to figure out the circumference of a circle, you can use this approximation because multiplying by 22 and dividing by 7 is something that's not super easy, but we can get it done. Whereas coming up with this number in your head when it goes on forever is actually a little bit impossible. So what's our formula for the circumference of a circle? Well, how many times around did our diameter go? 3 and a bit times. It went pi times, actually. So if you know what the diameter is, you just need to multiply it by 3 and a bit, or pi. So that means our formula is pi times d, where d is the diameter. Okay, and that is our formula for the circumference of a circle. So at this point, you might want to put a big box around it, highlight it, do something important with it to remind you that this is one of the most important formulas that you'll learn in this unit. Now the formula is sometimes written another way. By the way, for those of you who might be worried about what goes between these, remember that when we're using algebra, which is what we do for formulas, there's a little imaginary times in there, isn't there? But we don't write that times because it looks neater without it, and we know that we need to do pi times d. Now the other form for we can just write c, by the way, instead of circumference, so we have c equals pi d. C can also be equal to something else. Can you think about what it might be? It's always got to have pi in it, that 3 and a bit. But instead of writing diameter, is there something else that we could multiply by? Well, a diameter is the same as 2 radiuses, isn't it? Or radii is the right way to say that. So instead of multiplying by d, we could multiply by 2 radiuses. And I'm using r here to show the radius. Now when it comes to writing this formula so it looks really tidy, the natural convention is to put the simple numbers, like the 2, first, and then put other numbers, like pi, which is a special number, second, and then you put the letters last. Pronumerals come at the end. So the way that this is normally written would be not pi times 2r or pi 2r. We would write it as 2 pi r. So you have 2 formulas there that you can use. C equals 2 pi r and c equals pi d. Now, which one do you use? The answer is whichever one you like. Let's have a look at a couple of examples of how to use this. If you haven't got this down, you can pause the video to take those notes. And let's leave our formulas down the bottom there so that while we do our examples, we can see what to do. So example, if the radius is 5 centimetres, find the circumference. I'll just write C. All right, which formula are we going to use here? Well, we've been given the radius, so it makes sense to use the formula that has radius in it. So what do? Every single time we write out the formula. If you always start by writing the formula, then after a while you memorise it and there's no need to think about it, it just comes to you very naturally. On the second line, you substitute in what you need to. 2 is always going to be 2. Pi is always going to be pi. And at this point, you can put the times in as well to make it nice and simple to put in your calculator. Here you say r. All right, what's r? Radius is 5. And you can put your units there as well if you like. Next, you reach for your calculator and you say 2 times pi. Now, to get the pi, you have to hit shift and then that button in the middle of the bottom, times 5. And it'll give you an answer, 31.415. Now it goes on and on, so you'll need to round it off. Let's round it off to 1 decimal place, 31.4 centimetres to 1 dp. dp stands for decimal place. So when you round something off, always explain what you've rounded it off to so that it's really clear. All right, is there any other way we could have done this? Well, sure. If radius is 5, diameter must be 10. So if you wanted to use this formula, C equals pi d, it would be quite simple. At this step, you'd say that's pi and d is 10. You can work that out in your head quite easily. And at that point, you'd put pi times 10 in your calculator and you'll get the exact same answer. Now, make sure you also include units in your answer, so it's really nice and specific. And refer back to your picture if you need to check that your answer makes sense. Now, what else can we do with this formula? Well, we can use either one. If we're given a diameter, so let's say we're told that the diameter of a circle is, let's say it's 90 metres, perhaps it's a school oval, and we want to know what's the circumference. All right, which formula are you leaning towards this time? I'm thinking this one, because we're given the diameter and it's the simpler formula of the two. Now, by the way, if you've forgotten one but you remember the other, you're in luck. You really don't need to remember them both. You can stick with one as your favourite and just transfer between the two. Now, diameter, circumference equals pi d. I write that every time. And next I substitute in my unknowns. Pi is always pi, but here the diameter is 90 metres. Last step, reach for your calculator, shift, and then that button on the bottom gives you pi, times 90 equals 282.743. I'm going to round it off to one decimal place again, metres to 1 dp. Now, you can also use this formula working backwards. It's a little bit trickier, but since we've already looked at how to solve equations, this is something you guys should be able to take on. All right, so the sort of question I mean, let's switch to use a different colour, would be one like this. Can you see that okay? Yeah. If circumference equals, let's say, 50 centimetres, find the radius, or let's find the diameter. That's probably simpler. Okay, which formula are we leaning towards? Well, we're interested in diameter. We know circumference, so we'll pick this one. First step, every time, write out the formula. C equals pi d. All right, second step, still the same. Substitute in what you know. So we know that circumference of C is 50. Okay, so we can even put the units there if we like. And that equals pi times d. Now we don't know what d is, so we need to work this out. Now we want to solve this equation so that d is left all by itself, so that we've got d equals, and then whatever is on the other side of the equation will be what d is. At the moment we've got d times pi. How do we undo times pi? We can divide by pi. Now there's no need to write another line, you can do it right here. Divide this side by pi, but to keep it nice and fair and balanced, divide this side by pi as well. What happens over here is that the pi's cancel out. If you've started with d and you've times by pi and then divided by pi, you've just got d. So d now equals, you can write this out nice and tidy at this point, 50 over pi centimetres. Now, how do we put that into our calculator? A couple of different ways. You can hit 50 and then divide by, because that line means divide by pi. Or you can do it as a fraction, 50 over pi. And the answer comes out at 15.915. Run out of space here. D equals 15.9 to one decimal place. And we need to put our units in there, centimetres. So that's an example of how you can work backwards. When you know the circumference, you can find the diameter. How could you find the radius from this? Well, that's right, if you know the diameter, you can just halve it or divide it by 2, and that will give you the radius, which in this case is going to be a little bit less than 8 centimetres.